Hello everybody, and welcome to the current edition of KPMG's insurance series called Inside Insurance. Today we're going to have a specific focus on ESG. My name is Jean Rea and I'm a consulting partner here at KPMG, and today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Sarah Moran. Sarah is a director in our Sustainable Futures practice. For those not familiar with Sustainable Futures, it's our dedicated ESG advisory practice. Prior to joining the firm, Sarah worked up to financial controller level for about 10 years across a really broad number of sectors, including financial services, property, private healthcare and consumer goods. And I suppose off the back of that, Sarah brings a really deep client-centric focus as well as deep knowledge of strategic and operational opportunities and challenges for various sectors. Since joining KPMG in 2016, Sarah has been focusing on ESG, decarbonisation and value creation, including helping many clients stand up their programmes in this area. So Sarah, absolutely delighted to have you with us today. We'll start with, I suppose, quite a basic question. So ESG, CSRD, EU taxonomy, lots of acronyms flying around, and we're starting to hear a lot more about them now. But I suppose at a high level, can you explain what they are and why we're starting to hear so much about them right now?
Yeah, no worries, Jean, and delighted to be here today. Interestingly, ESG is not a new term. So it was first referenced back in 2004 in a UN report, Who Cares Wins. And really, since then, our climate has continually changed, as has our economy and society. And essentially, in today's world, there are four main drivers to the ESG agenda. So we have regulation. So as you mentioned, the CSRD, or the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and the EU taxonomy. So these are two complementary directives coming out of the EU, and really for market participants to demonstrate their ESG credentials. Worth noting, the EU taxonomy is science-based, so it's quite binary and really focusing on achieving a Paris-aligned low emissions pathway in the future. We also see the climate topic echoed globally in the international IFRS sustainability standards. So really it's not just an EU-centric agenda at the moment. Then we can see within supply chain, that's a second driver. So large corporates, many are setting net zero targets, often to 2050. And we can see with the Science Based Targets initiative, just by way of example, over 8,000 corporates have committed to climate action, either by setting a target or a commitment to net zero. So quite a lot of activity in the net zero space.
So you've touched on regulation and supply chain, then what about sentiment and the Gen Zs and the millennials?
Yeah, so here we're seeing that these generational cohorts, they place a different value on what constitutes good business practices. And this deals with both people and planet, right? And an interesting survey in 2024 showed that 2 out of 10 of those generational cohorts have already changed jobs to align to their environmental values, and 1/4 are planning to do so. These cohorts as well, they research the businesses that they purchase goods from, and they also demonstrate a willingness to pay for sustainable products. And then I suppose the last driver is really from the finance sector. So we can see that financial market participants now need to report on how green or not their portfolios are. And this is in the form of the green assets ratio. So this is derived from the EU taxonomy, that science-based framework that I mentioned. So we would see the pricing differential associated with ESG and non-ESG product. We would see that increase over time as these institutions look to improve their own GAR metrics. And then looking to the future, we can see in the World Economic Forum's recent Global Risks Report, so they issue this report annually, and it shows really the horizon for risks globally. We can see that in the 10-year horizon, 7 of the top 10 risks are centred around environmental and social themes and topics. And we can see that the remaining 3 actually relate to technology. So misinformation, cyber and AI.
Risk is actually a good segue. So I suppose the central bank last year would have published their guidance in relation to climate change risk. And we've heard, I suppose, the kind of reporting lens of CSRD, But obviously, a lot of insurance firms are trying to deal with both of these together, right? So I'm just wondering what your views are in terms of trying to tackle both in tandem.
Yeah, absolutely. It can seem overwhelming, but when you take a step back, ultimately there are points of commonality between these frameworks and requirements. And the CSRD itself is centred around 10 ESG topics. And organisations need to conduct an assessment to determine which of those 10 topics are relevant or material to their business. We're helping clients across all sectors, and without exception, we find that climate change is falling out of that assessment as a material topic. If that topic is material to your business, you need to conduct a scenario analysis assessment. And scenarios are not predictions or forecasts of the future. They're really a set of assumptions that represent a potential future state. And businesses need to, under the CSRD, assess their business model under two different scenarios or potential future states. So a low emissions pathway that's aligned with the Paris Agreement. And this was where organisations and countries committed to curbing the increase in temperature by end of century with reference to pre-industrial levels to well below 2 degrees, which is with a stretch ambition to curbing that temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So we see that's our 1.5 degree target. So the first task of the CSRD is to assess your business under that pathway. In that pathway, there's a lot of policies to decarbonise our economy, but we do achieve that decarbonisation, and that reduction in emissions results in a reduction in temperature and a consequent reduction in physical impacts. The CSRD also asks businesses to look at a counterfactual whereby we don't achieve that reduction. So the language is a high emissions scenario, which is by extension a high temperature scenario. And in this scenario, we don't impose the policies to decarbonise our economy. However, we do see amplified physical risks because the temperature increases over time. So there are the two pathways that the CSRD asks organisations to assess their business under. There is a phase-in option for up to 3 years that businesses can avail of before they need to quantify those particular impacts, but they do need to qualitatively assess what the potential impacts could be. The Central Bank of Ireland then also ask insurers to qualitatively assess the impact of climate on their business through a materiality assessment. That's the language there that's used. And essentially the outputs of that exercise determine the level of quantification and the number of scenarios that a business will need to assess its business model under. And essentially how we help clients to meet these two frameworks and guidance in tandem is we extract metrics from publicly available scenarios or data sets, and we use those metrics to qualitatively assess the business model under the different scenarios. And it should be noted that there's time horizon differences between the requirements. However, we just splice at the relevant time horizon at the time stamp using these metrics. So you can essentially kill two birds with the one stone across the two requirements. And then as a next step from that, those metrics can be used to either quantify climate risk as needed or can be used as KRIs or key risk indicators to embed into the enterprise risk management framework.
Yep, all very complex. But as you say, good overlap between the two. I suppose there's, as you say, there's a lot in it, right? There's materiality, there's temperature pathways, qualitative, quantitative. So Sarah, what are the main challenges facing insurers as they look to understand the potential impacts of climate, of ESG risk?
I think it's an important consideration with ESG that it also brings opportunity, not just risk. And some of those opportunity lies in new products and new markets as our economy and society evolve to accommodate our changing climate. Uninsurability is really a key threat to our economy and society, and EIOPA actually have issued the Protection Gap Dashboard, which is a useful reference to show the disparity in coverage between different jurisdictions and across various perils. And obviously when we speak about ESG, there's two lenses, two distinct lenses in the insurance context across underwriting and investments.
So maybe if we start with underwriting first, I suppose, what are some of the considerations there?
Yeah, so here we can see an increase in claims volume, for example, post an environmental event. And we also see a difference in the types of claims, certainly as our economy is transitioning towards net zero, which is very reliant on the success or failure of various technologies. From a general insurance context, insurers are uniquely placed to build resilience in the economy. And I suppose it's no accident that the EU taxonomy, that science-based framework that I mentioned, for the underwriting activity is focused wholly on climate change adaptation, so building that resilience to our climate. Here we're talking about flood, for example, and hail, and all of those various perils. So really looking for society and the economy to build resilience, flood defences, for example, and how that can impact on premium. When it comes to the life side, we're very much talking about climate change impacts on human health, so both morbidity and mortality. And we can see that temperature increase, for example, can impact on air quality and respiratory health. It can also impact on the distribution of vector-borne disease, and it can also impact on the resilience or antimicrobial resilience, which are really challenging concepts in the context of human health. For context as well, 2023 was the warmest year on record. So Copernicus confirmed this at a global level, and the EPA have confirmed this within Ireland. So definitely a real and tangible risk in the context of impacts on human health.
For sure, yeah. And then maybe just on the asset or the investment side then, some of the key considerations and observations. Yeah,
so in this context, investment value and performance are top of mind. Here we capture stranded assets, for example, and those traditional safe bets, for example, government bonds, these can be subject to the knock-on impacts of climate. So these are referred to as second-order impacts of climate. Some examples here include geographical distribution of physical impacts and also certain regions that have concentrated exposure to high-emitting sectors. Affordability and availability of reinsurance is also an interesting topic, and the CBI have specifically referenced this within the guidance. So ongoing availability of reinsurance and placing reliance on that as a management measure is something that is subject to challenge, and certainly the feasibility of that assumption will need to be substantiated and will need to stand up to challenge over time. Also, we need to think about the impact of compromised operations in the wake of environmental events and extreme weather events. And let's not forget about reputation as well, and the impact of being associated with high impact sectors. So the East African crude oil pipeline, for example, last year is a notable case where over 20 insurers under pressure from activists had to essentially state that they would not support this initiative. So again, real and tangible impacts there on the investment side.
Yeah. So thanks a million, Sarah. Really, I suppose, fascinating discussion. We started with CSRD and EU taxonomy and we ended up with a pipeline. So really broad and really interesting discussion. I suppose just before we wrap up, I suppose if you had one key takeaway for the audience today, what would that be?
I suppose it's CSRD, for example, this main driver of the ESG agenda can be taken as two ways. It can be seen as a tick box cost to the business, or it can be seen as something to really drive strategy and attract and retain customers and staff, and also financiers as well, driving value across the business and the economy.
Great, thanks a million. Thanks, Sarah, for joining us today. And if any of the topics particularly resonated with you today, or if you have any queries, please feel free to reach out directly to Sarah or myself or to your usual KPMG contact. Thanks for joining us today, and we really look forward to welcoming you on future issues of Inside Insurance.